course at NYU is 36 hours long, not at one time. It's not like a cricket game, but at an hour at a time. So we're going to truncate for 36 hours into about 36 minutes. But it's also a challenge because those two ideas of success and happiness very rarely go the way that we think they're going to go in terms of their relationship, and in fact, very rarely actually go together at all. So let me give you a quick story to illustrate. About 5 years ago, I had been looking forward desperately to a certain Saturday night. I had been traveling, I was doing a lot of performance coaching at the time, and so I was on the road, I couldn't wait to get back. And it wasn't just getting home, it was that night, that Saturday night, I was going to finish binge watching the final 3 episodes of Breaking Bad, right, with my girlfriend, right? And you all know, because you all travel so much, that binge watching is tough enough as it is, but when you're trying to do it with somebody else, it's really hard. So there we were, it's Saturday night in New York in my apartment, and like the popcorn's made. You could smell it, it's sitting right there in front of us. I literally have it queued up right here to hit play on the Apple TV. And my phone rings, and sitting there stupidly, it's sitting there on my coffee table, and I look down, and it says no caller ID. Now, we know these days that if it says no caller ID, you just don't pick up the phone, especially on a Saturday night, unless you're single, which clearly I wasn't. And yet still, I leaned over, and even though my girlfriend was shooting me daggers, I picked it up slowly. Hello. And the voice that came over totally shocked me. First, it was like it was shot out of a cannon, how quickly he was talking, but also who it was. I picked it up, I said hello, he said, hi, you don't know me, but my name is John Green. Now, his name really wasn't John Green. I'm making that name up because I need to protect the client privacy, but I absolutely knew who John Green was. As a matter of fact, most of us here would know who John Green is because John Green is one of the most accomplished people in the music business. I'd never met the man before, and yet here he was on the phone to me. I said, hello. He kept going without stopping. He said, listen, ever since I was a kid, I knew what I defined as success. Ever since I was a kid, I knew I wanted to sing. Ever since I was a kid, I knew that I wanted to perform. Ever since I was a kid, I knew that I had one definition for what would be successful for me. And all through my training, all through my music school conservatory training, all through my rehearsals, I had been bugging my agent since the day I signed with him. I knew that the one measure of success for me would be when I got to sing a solo performance at Carnegie Hall in New York City. And now it's happening. I'm still totally shocked. My girlfriend stalked off. She might have left. And I go, congratulations, when's it happening? He goes, oh, no, I don't think you understand. It's happening right now. And it took me a second, but I looked at my watch, and I remember the hands being aligned. I was like, it's 9:15. I looked out the window. It's Saturday night in New York City. I said, are you calling me from intermission? He said, yes, I am. He said, you know, I have worked so hard. I have sacrificed everything. I have become this great singer, and yet I'm not a good father. I'm not a good husband. I'm not a particularly nice guy, to be honest with you. Right? I've worked incredibly hard. I just walked off stage at intermission. My agent gave me your number because I realized that I have, by all measurements, become successful, but I am absolutely miserable. Where did I go wrong? True story. Later on, I'll tell you what we did about that. Now, the idea of success and happiness clearly don't always go together, but it has fascinated me for pretty much as long as I can remember. Right? I grew up, and my very earliest memory in life was of sneaking downstairs after bedtime. I was about 3 years old, to watch my parents in the living room. My parents would be playing music together. Right? Now, my parents weren't amateur musicians just there to play. My parents were very, very successful professional musicians. My father was a flute player in the Pittsburgh Symphony for 45 years, one of the great orchestras in the world. My mother was an opera singer who would sing at places like the Metropolitan Opera, La Scala, London, Paris, you name it. So as far as I was concerned, I had seen the 3,000, 4,000 people crowds. And I knew they were successful, and here they were in the living room, and they were incredibly happy playing their music. So kind of the equation for me was, when I'm successful, when I get a big gig at a big opera company, when I get a great position at a symphony orchestra, then I can be happy. This is how I thought about it until, well, pretty much when I graduated college. When I graduated college, I took a job as an agent. I was an agent for very, very high-level classical musicians, mostly opera singers at the time. And so I got a chance to see these enormously successful people. Right? And on the one hand, I saw people just like my folks, people who were singing everywhere, at the Carnegie Halls, at the Metropolitan Operas, you name it, that's where they were. And they were really happy people. They had families, they were happy folks, they had spiritual pursuits, they had hobbies. I think life was going well for them. But on the other hand, I saw just as many clients who were just as successful, singing major places all around the world, and they were miserable. I get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning from a client, well, 3 o'clock my time, not their time, because they take care of themselves. But they'd call me at 3 in the morning crying. I'm miserable, I'm not happy, I haven't seen my family, I don't have a family, I don't have friends. And I saw enough of this where we see one hand, people who are successful on stage and off, and on the other, people who are successful on stage but not off, that I left. I thought, we're losing a lot of great talent. I need to know what's going on psychologically if I'm going to understand how these people are succeeding on both levels. So first I looked into performance psychology, and I worked in that industry for a while, in that school for a while. Then I went to positive psychology, the science of what makes life worth living, what makes us work at our best. Right? And as I started to look around outside of my little world of classical music, I started to realize that the trend that I had seen with my clients was actually pervasive throughout fields. Right? So you can look at folks, I started asking this question, I should say, when does success and happiness coexist? I need to figure this out. I need to see how we can understand it and nurture more of it for people who are performing at in any field at a very high level. So we started looking around and we started seeing people like this, people like Steve Jobs, right? Jobs, who is by all measurements incredibly successful, right? Changed the world, the way that we look at it, the way that we interact with each other, right? The way that we interact with our lives, right? Incredibly powerful, incredibly wealthy, incredibly everything, earth-changing. And yet, was he a happy guy? By most accounts, no. Not a great family situation, not great friend situation, not particularly wonderful relationships at work, not a happy fella. Excellent, yes, successful, absolutely, but not immersed in positive emotion by any means. You can look at other folks like this. Kanye, right? I've been talking about Kanye since way before he took a step back to work on himself. Right? But the idea is he is, again, successful in his business by all measurements. He is, as far as I know, he's like the only non-athlete who has a shoe deal. Right? That's success. He has his own shoes. But is he a happy guy? Clearly not. Right? We can look at folks in your fields, people like Bobby Knight, maybe example number one, power negative thinking. Right? A guy who is excellent, wins a national championship, but then gets fired for choking out one of his own players. Right? Constantly abusive. If you've ever heard the Bobby Knight halftime speech, which I would happily play for you, but I would probably get kicked off the stage, look it up. It's one of the most abusive things you've ever heard. Not necessarily a happy guy, but absolutely excellent. And we can look at individual athletes. One of many, someone like Hope Solo, one of the great soccer goalkeepers in soccer history, period, not living a life of happiness. So I'm not going to argue today that you need to be happy to be your best, because it's clear that you don't. You can be excellent. But on the other hand, we look at people like this, the Richard Bransons of the world, who say happiness comes first for him, that family relationships come first for him, that he wouldn't be where he is unless he had those things, that well-being in his life. And yet he's also achieved excellence, right? People like Maya Angelou, let's take the silver spoon out of the mouth. I mean, talk about someone who's come from a really, really, really rough background, which I'm sure some of your players can relate to, right? Who was orphaned very young, beaten very young, child prostitute, child pimp, right? And yet, she grew up to always put this well-being first. If I'm going to do something wonderful, it's about me being happy first, me living a good life, right? You look at someone like, again, on the athletic side, Pete Carroll, right? Cover of Mindful magazine, pioneer in positive coaching, still wins a Super Bowl. And finally, you can look at an individual athlete like Michael Phelps, who I think is particularly interesting, in part because he won when he was not happy, but then he went on to maintain that level when he was. So the idea being that you have a choice. You can either choose success and excellence on one hand by paying no attention whatsoever to well-being and happiness, positive emotion, or you can choose this. I always say to my students, this side these are not the lives I wish upon my son or my friends. This is the route that I would much prefer to see, and it's actually a possibility. But let's step away from these super successful people and these examples. Let's look at a couple numbers and ideas. This is an article from a year and a half ago in the New York Times. It talks about Goldman Sachs new hires, and the idea that Goldman Sachs new hires get the highest salaries of any new hire on Wall Street, right? Fantastic. In a way, it's like your first-round draft picks. You get picked, you get the highest salary, so on and so forth. Goldman Sachs new hires also have the highest levels of depression and anxiety on Wall Street. So just being successful, getting that first-round pick or getting picked to be at Goldman Sachs hardly guarantees that we're going to be happy. Right? The idea that we've been successful, we're actually finding much higher levels of depression. Now, maybe they're not ready for it. Maybe like your first-round draft picks. Maybe like your young athletes. They're just not able to deal with it yet. So let's look at somebody else. Let's look at lawyers. Lawyers are number one when it comes to earning in the white-collar category. Right? So they earn the highest amount of money. They're more mature. They should be able to deal with this, right? Kind of like your veteran players. And yet, we all want to be number one, right? unless it's other categories like this. They're also number one in nicotine abuse. They're number one in alcohol abuse. And they're number one in depression. So whether you are younger or older, the idea of being successful, getting the job, making the money, it's not leading towards happiness. What we're finding is it's actually leading the other direction. We can look at someone like this, college students. Is this a real picture of college students, by the way? No, right? Everyone like laughs. My students find it hilarious. I'm like, why is it not a picture of college students? What's that? They're not on phones, that's right. They're talking to each other, to the social idea. They're all smiling, and clearly their clothes are clean. None of these things happen, right? So here are kids who have realized success, probably the highest level that they have in their young lives. Getting into college is huge, can be the 4 best years of my life. And yet when we look at a poll from Gallup in 2015, 90% of them have felt overwhelming stress in the past year at school. All right, stress is fine. We all get stressed out. But let's look at some of these numbers. Almost 60% have felt very sad in the past year at school. Huge accomplishment, and yet 45% of them felt that things were hopeless in the past year at school. And finally, 31% of them were too depressed to function, work-debilitating depression. So you have a huge accomplishment, and yet you don't enjoy the benefits. By the way, this last stat, 31% too depressed to function, at one university that is in the Northeast, very prestigious, we won't name it, we'll just say it rhymes with Schmarvard. That university hits 80%. 80% of their students go through work-debilitating depression at some point during their 4 years in school. So success and happiness are clearly having an issue together. And here's another one, athletes, right? These are all students from the same high school who are all going to play sports at the schools that are on their sweatshirts, right? Now, maybe it's the fact that these students before didn't have structure, they didn't have organization, didn't have guidance, but these folks, they have coaches, they have structure, they know what they're gonna do, they have an instant social circle with their teammates. They should be fine, right? And they're going to D1 to play ball. But wait, these are the numbers. 52% of them felt overwhelming anxiety of men, 59% of women. So even though you're playing a sport and you're getting into school and you're getting what might be, for many of you, your dream, you're still having these issues, right? We found that 41% are too depressed to function, 45% of women. And this, seriously considered suicide, 14% of NCAA athletes have seriously considered suicide. You want to get an even more depressing number? 6% of them have attempted it. So just because they're achieving on a really high level, getting to this point doesn't mean that they're experiencing happiness or well-being, right? And finally, for your level of athletes, let's talk about this poll, which is old. It's 1997, but I think it illustrates it beautifully. Sports Illustrated poll, Olympic level athletes, you're offered a banned performance enhancing substitute that comes with 2 guarantees. Number 1, you will not be caught. Number 2, you will win every competition that you enter for the next 5 years. Oh wait, sorry, there's more. And then you'll die from the side effects of the substance. Right? That's a big sacrifice. That's a lot of stress to be under. Right? But how many of the athletes do you think said yes? To 80? Anyone else? 60? Okay, great. So they didn't give us an actual number. All they told us was that it was more than 50% of the athletes. This poll's 20 years old. Where do we think it is right now? So what we're seeing is a culture of folks who believe that when we are successful, that's when we're going to be happy. And we look to the exemplars and we're not stopping to try to achieve that. And yet we can look at other examples. We do have folks like Yo-Yo Ma, arguably the best known, most loved classical musician in the world, who says the only reason to play is for pleasure. We have folks like Branson, right? Most people would assume my business success and the wealth that comes with it have brought me happiness, but they haven't. In fact, it's the reverse. I'm successful, wealthy, and connected because I'm happy. And when it comes to your field, we have folks like Simone Biles. People think you have to be serious to do a good job, but I think if you're having fun, you can do better. Individuals and teams. Richard Sherman on Pete Carroll. I don't think anybody thought his system could work. It shows you can win with positivity. So we have lived in this culture where success comes before happiness, but we're starting to see exemplars creep into our culture that show us that's not necessarily the case. The idea that success comes before happiness, we're going to argue today, is that it's reversed. Is that there are tremendous advantages when we put happiness before success. We put particularly positive emotion before success. We will touch on relationships today. We'll touch on a couple of other ideas. But the idea is, do you have an advantage as a positive coach? Priming people with positive emotion, so on and so forth. Now, we can talk about stories all day, but let's look at some of the studies that we've seen that sort of illustrate this. This is a wonderful study, one of the earliest studies we know. Super simple. We study 5-year-olds. Right? In this case, these researchers looked at 5-year-olds, and 5-year-olds are fantastic, right? Because they basically eat the same thing, they live the same lives, they do not show up for studies hungover in the morning, at least not yet in my in my experience, like college sophomores. And so what they did was they gave these 5-year-olds basically a puzzle to put together. And they primed 3 different groups of 5-year-olds. The first group wasn't primed at all. Please go right ahead and complete the puzzle. Next group, hey, for the next 30 seconds, I want you to think of something that makes you sad. Right? And the final group was, for the next 30 seconds, we want you to think of the happiest memory you can. Now, these are 5-year-olds, right? So it's not like I looked across the sandbox and saw my future partner, right? It was like I had pudding for lunch. I was awesome in kickball at recess. Minor things. What we found was we compared the 5-year-olds who were primed with positive emotion to the 5-year-olds who were not primed at all. They were 30% more accurate. They were faster. They were more collaborative. On a whole scope of metrics, we found that they outperformed their non-primed peers. But when we compared them to their peers who had been primed with negative emotion, think about the Bobby Knights of the world, the yelling, the screaming, bring yourself down, they were actually 50% more effective when they were positive, when they were primed with positive emotion, than when they were primed with negative emotion. So how are you priming your players? How are your players priming themselves? What are they doing to their brain to take advantage of the idea of positive emotions? Now, as far as I know, no one here is coaching 5-year-olds. Anyone? Anyone? No, right. So if you're not coaching 5-year-olds, how much can this really apply? Well, that's why this study took a look at doctors who had at least 3 years of medical experience. And in this case, they gave the doctors 50 symptoms to diagnose. And what they did was they primed them again 3 different ways. Either here are your symptoms, no priming, or read a medical journal, it's like a neutral priming, or really simply, they were given a bag of candy. That's it. Given a bag of candy, their spirits were raised a little bit. They weren't allowed to eat the candy lest the sugar wreak havoc with the study. But what they found was that those doctors who'd been primed with positive emotion, given a little bit of a boost, positive emotion boost, diagnosed about 20% more accurately than their non-prime peers. Which basically tells us 2 things. On the one hand, the next time you go to the doctor, you are going to want to make them happy. Right? On the other hand, something's happening to us when we are primed with positive emotion that is allowing us to operate differently. Right? And it's not always just boosting our well-being. Sometimes it's getting through other challenging things. So in this study from the University of North Carolina, Barb Fredrickson and her colleagues, what they did was they stressed out college students. How do you stress out a college student? Well, you bring them into a study, and right when they get there, you say, great, you have 60 seconds to prepare a talk. You're going to go out there and give it in front of hundreds of people. All right? College students get stressed. We all get stressed. Many of us get stressed out when it comes to public speaking. So there they are. They're primed this way. They have heart rate monitors placed in them already. And what happens to them? Bam, heart rates go through the roof. Palms get sweaty, right? The breathing changes. They're experiencing serious stress, right? And what happens next is they're told right before they go out on stage, oh, you don't have to give a talk. But watch this video. They were either shown videos that were anxiety-provoking, like scary videos, neutral, like static, or positive emotion videos, things that sort of like little comedy skits, things that would pick you up a little bit, make you laugh. What they found was that those students who had been primed with positive emotion right after that scare recovered cardiovascularly up to 52% more quickly than the non-primed. So if you're thinking about athletes who are trying to make the absolute most of their systems, what happens when we are scaring them, overly stressing them out versus giving them intermittent prompts with positive emotion to help them physiologically optimize their work, right? Now, we look at it in school, we see lots and lots and lots of different benefits. So for example, we see higher GPAs with college students who've been tested with positive emotion and higher levels of optimism, which we'll touch on in a second, right? We see improved memory. So University of Maryland, they found that those college students who were primed with positive emotion in exactly the same way as the 5-year-olds, think your happiest possible memory for the next 45 seconds, retained about 35% more words in a foreign language that they were then taught. So if you're thinking about your athletes and what you want them to retain, are you able to prime them in positive emotions so that their memories get that advantage as well? Right? When we look at standardized tests, SATs, LSATs, GMATs, you name it, we find that students who are primed with positive emotion answer more questions, but they also answer a higher percentage of them correctly. Something is happening that's giving us an opportunity to work differently, our brains to work differently, and often more effectively, right? Better creative problem solving. Again, University of Maryland, you show them something like a clicker or a brick or a chair. How many different uses can you come up with for this? About 70% more uses when they've been primed with positive emotion before they actually have to take that test. And finally, and this is so perfect for, I think, for you and the folks you work with. You have a broadened visual perspective. So in Frederickson, North Carolina, looked with sophisticated eye tracking technology to see where people were seeing when they were primed with negative emotion versus positive emotion. The negative emotion primed them to look very, very tightly. It's kind of fight or flight, right? What happens is we narrow our vision. We're nervous, we're scared, we need to see what's going on right there. But when they were primed with positive emotion before looking at these screens, they retained information that came from the borders as well as the centers. That is to say, if you're a point guard, do you want your point guard seeing the entire court, or do you want them honing in on one person because they're nervous and stressed? If you're a quarterback or a quarterback's coach, do you want them honing in on one person, or do you want them seeing the entire field? What we're finding with positive emotion is not only is it allowing us to operate differently, it's allowing us to see the world differently and operate at a higher level as well. Right. Now, this is a little different from positive emotion, but it's absolutely related, and it's one of my favorite studies, so I had to share it with you. This is explanatory style. Explanatory style is how we explain bad events. So we lose a game, how do we explain it? We have a bad outing as a pitcher, how do we explain it? We haven't hit the ball in a while, how do we explain it? We have two ways. Either we do it in an optimistic way, which is basically limiting that bad news to, I had a bad game, right? And potentially explaining it in terms of other people's great work. He was hitting incredibly well today. He would have hit anything, right? To be able to explain it as someone else and to explain it as temporary, basically tomorrow's another day, I'm still a great pitcher, I can beat other guys, makes a massive difference than if we say, this season is lost. I'm pitching terribly this year, right? Or I was just awful yesterday versus he was hitting or they were hitting really well. So let me give you an example of what that looks like. Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania, kind of the father of positive psychology and fortunate to say my mentor, did an extensive study looking at explanatory styles in the press during 83, 84. Looked at the Celtics and found they had a very optimistic explanatory style, which is to say when they had a loss, hey, those guys were playing really well today. Or to say it's a tough arena to win in. Or that was a tough road trip, meaning things will get better tomorrow. And when they saw what happened after a loss versus the Vegas spread, this is what we saw. They beat the point spread almost 70% following a loss. Because even though they had lost a game, they knew that tomorrow was another day. The way they talked about it was that tomorrow's another day and I can play better. I have that ability, right? In 84-85, they beat the point spread 81.3% after a loss, right? So if you're a coach, great. If you're an inveterate gambler, even better, right? Because you can look at how people speak about their losses and you can get a strong sense of how they're going to perform the next day. Meanwhile, we look at the Nets, who amazingly, at one point, I'm sorry if there are any Nets representatives here, did better than 500 at one point. And they won almost 52% of their games. And yet, after the point spread, they only won 37.8. The way they were explaining their losses were, we just can't win this season. We're not good enough to beat anybody else. Right? So they were coming back and assuming they were going to lose the next day. And the percentages were showing they were. Right? In 84-85, it changed. They beat the point spread 62% after a loss. But when you look at their explanatory style, it had changed too. It was, today is just one game, tomorrow's another day. They played really well today. We can do it tomorrow. So not only do we find does optimism help people achieve on a higher level, we also find that it helps raise our levels of positive emotions as well. So there are huge amounts of benefits to the team, to the individual, you name it. Now, the question, of course, becomes, what are we going to do? What do you do to help your athletes, to help yourselves, to help your organizations get more? Let me skip the magic number. Oh, actually, let me go back. Actually, I don't know how to go back, but there it is. So the question becomes, is there a magic number? Should it be great all the time? Should you always be happy? Should everything be wonderful? And the answer is clearly no. We don't know of a magic number. As my colleague said before, this is science. 50% of what I'm going to tell you is wrong. I just don't know which half. But with the magic number, what we've seen over and over and over is that when we have more positive interactions than negative interactions is when we take advantage of that positive emotion, right? So for every time that you criticize someone, say you have to play better, say how could you drop that ball? Say shape up, let's go pick it up. You need to have at least 2, 3, so on, positive interactions. Say, hey, it's good to see you working hard today. Hey, great to see you supporting your teammate. So to find some way, in a way like the panel talked about yesterday, the director found something good to say, and then they would find something critical to say. We see that number, more positive interactions to negative, we see a vast difference in how people realize that the advantage that positive emotions offer us. And by the way, there is a top end. We've also seen in multiple studies that when there's too much positive emotion, it becomes unreal, right? It's fake. You gotta be critical. One study showed about 11 to 1, right? If you have too much positive to negative, no one's getting better. No one's seeing that they can get better. No one's hearing ways to get better. So we've seen numbers 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1. But keep in mind, how often are you criticizing versus praising? How often are you sharing something good versus sharing something that needs to be repaired, right? Because we're seeing that that makes a huge difference. Now, how can you cultivate these things? That ends up being the question. What can you do to increase positive emotions? Well, what we did in the book that my colleague and I wrote, You Thrive, How to Succeed in College and Life, is every chapter has 2 to 3 interventions at the very end, all empirically sound. And what we wanted to do, because we know college students are super busy, and professional and high-level athletes and executives even more so, is give people interventions that took no more than 5 minutes a day. Right? So recently I got an email from Anson Dorrance who said, I'm giving this book to every single one of my players as a mandatory read, in part because the positive emotion bit is really helping, but also because the interventions are quick. You can apply them and you can do them in 5 minutes. So something like this, I am grateful for. One of the most empirically sound interventions we have is called the Gratitude Journal. The Gratitude Journal is, end of each day, take 5 minutes to write down 3 things that you're grateful for, 3 new things. You can't cheat and do the same thing as yesterday. 3 new things you're grateful for and why you're grateful for them, right? So it could be, I'm grateful for my quarterback coach because he helps me get better every day. I'm grateful for my dog because she greets me at the door every day and I feel loved. Whatever it might be, 3 new things, takes about 5 minutes. And it's not that we're just finding these things, it's that we're reprogramming our brains to the neuroplasticity that we talked about before. When we do this consistently, it ends up being like brushing our teeth. It becomes a habit. So every day we start, the first day is, I don't know what I'm grateful for. What am I possibly going to look for? I have no idea, right? But then it gets a little easier. So the guy I talked about in the beginning, that musician who was so well known, who was so miserable, one of the first things we did was, when I did talk to him the next day after his performance, was I talked to him and he said, I come home every day, all I do is complain. I'm like, great, we're gonna turn that around. When you get home every day, you're gonna think about 3 things that you're grateful for and you're gonna share them with your wife. The guy wasn't a big writer. He was a huge extrovert, just wanted to talk. So if you're not the writing kind of guy, at least share it with someone every single day. And so he told me, he'd stand outside of his door and he'd be like, what am I gonna say when I get in there? What am I gonna say when I get in there? He couldn't think of anything. Then finally he'd think of it. She wouldn't let him in until he did. And he'd walk in, he's like, okay, I'm grateful for this. My colleagues who really helped me sing, the conductor who was really good to me, and the fact they get to sing. Every day it got easier and easier and easier. And when it wasn't easy, when he was in a rough day, he'd go pick up his journal that he'd ask her again and say, okay, give me some things that I've said recently. And she'd remind him. The journal you can look up again and say, oh, that's right, I have a lot of things I'm grateful for, right? So if you're doing this as a coach, if you're doing this in player development, if you're doing this as a player, one of the questions could be, as a group or as individuals, give me 3 things you're grateful for being out there on the field, for playing this sport, for something in your life, having that go. We've done in schools where we have teachers say, all right, we want 1 thing from everybody. What are you grateful for and why? Boom, 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 boom. So it becomes a part of that culture, right? Super simple, 3 things and why. Write them down, speak them out loud, just make it consistent. Raises our level of positive emotion over the course of about 30 days, right? Another thing is praising others. Right? Again, to the point of relationships. What we find is that something as simple as sending an email, sending a text, 1 a morning to someone who you appreciate, you want to thank. Hey, thank you so much for what you did on the field yesterday. Thank you so much for having my back. Thank you so much for so on and so forth. Right? We find is that people raise their levels of positive emotions, but they also increase their levels of relationships. And relationships are the number 1 predictor of well-being across the in the field, period. So what we find is someone sends an email, someone sends a text, but what they get back, because you limit them to 2 minutes, what they get back is like an incredible thank you from all these people every day. They realize they have these great relationships. They realize that they have people that they can work with, whether they're stressed out or whether they're celebrating things. So 1 praise a day, that simple, raises our level of positive emotions and increases the level of our positive relationships. Meditation. Now, an NCAA, a study just came out of NCAA Division I football players a couple of weeks ago, actually, that looked at meditation. This is a 12-minute intervention, but I'll give you a 6-minute version in a second. What they found was that these players who had been given 1 of 2 trainings, one was in relaxation, the other one was in mindfulness meditation, 12 minutes each day, they found that, and it was during training camp, during the summer hours, it was super intense, is that both of them, both the relaxation and the meditation groups, both of them achieved benefits. But what they found was that after long, grueling 3-hour practices, this is University of Miami football players, that after 3 hours of practice, the meditation group was able to focus much, much more clearly, and they had higher levels of positive emotion. So 12 minutes of meditation a day means that after all this hard work, you can focus more intently, and you have higher levels of positive emotion and are realizing those benefits as well. Right? Now, if you don't want to do 12 minutes, and some people do get afraid of meditation, what we see Michael Baiman at the University of Pennsylvania says that 2 sessions of 3 minutes of deep, focused breathing a day will raise our levels of achievement on things like standardized testing, LSATs, SATs, so on and so forth. We haven't looked at, as far as I know, we haven't looked at athletes yet, but 2 minutes, 2 times, 3 minutes each day of focused breathing gives us benefits to start to reflect the meditation benefits. And maybe that's the next step to actually realizing it. And finally, becoming a mentor. Now, you're all mentors. I want to sort of give this generalized mentor idea. You're all mentors in many, many ways. But we do know this, that the number one predictor of college graduates thriving within 10 years after they've graduated, the number one predictor from a poll out of UCLA that looked at over 100,000 college students was that they had a professor, a mentor, or a coach who cared about them as a person. Not just that they helped them get better at something, but they cared about them as a person. So we were sitting at a round table yesterday, and someone shared the idea that Steve Kerr had gone out to each of his players and sat with them and asked them questions about their lives, right? As opposed to just, how are you going to get better? And that's working out pretty well for them out there. But we're seeing it in a number of different ways. So how are you working with your players as human beings? And again, to the panel's point up here yesterday, does director care about me as a human being, or are they just drilling me? You can still win with the drilling. It doesn't necessarily mean you're getting that advantage. Right? How much time do I have, by the way, Matt? Just check with you. 2 minutes? All right, cool. So this guy, this is Earl Patriarcho. He is, we are going to skip him, unfortunately. Although, can I take 5 minutes? Cool, let's do 5 minutes. All right, super quick. First client I ever had, when I was at ICM, Earl sent what I would do obsessively, kind of like you, I'm sure, would do, is watch tape, right? You watch tape all the time. I'd listen to tape and watch tape all the time of young singers, and constantly listening for the next superstar. And one day I get this videotape in, and I'm thrilled that all of you here know what a videotape is. If you try to explain that to an 18 to 23-year-old, they look at you like you're crazy. And you're like, no, it's plastic, it's about that big, and you put it into a machine. It's like YouTube. They're like, oh yeah, cool, YouTube. So I watch Earl's tape and I'm like, this guy is amazing. And I go into my boss's office and she takes one look. She's like, absolutely not, no way. No way, no, can't do it. Actually, she didn't say that. She said, she was a very proper British woman with these huge owlish glasses, and she put them down to the end of her nose and she said, oh, sweetie darling, no. I was like, come on, Caroline. And I'm like this young American, eager, let's go. No. Over and over, back and forth, till finally she was like, you want them? You take them. Which is clearly we all need to fall on our faces one of these days. Congratulations, this is your big chance. So I call Earl, and we talk for a second. It turns out he's been making money as a singing waiter in a pizza joint out in San Francisco for the last couple of years. And I'm like, okay, well, I love your tape. Let's see what we can do. The other thing about him, though, is he's incredibly upbeat. He's like, I just love the fact that I get to sing and make music. It's wonderful. I have my family. Everything's great. I'm like, all right, let's see what happens. So he comes to New York, and I'm standing there in the front lobby of ICM, big, powerful management firm, and he walks in, and I know I'm in trouble immediately. Because he walks in, he has no buttons on his overcoat, it's frayed all along the bottom. He's like a fresh dollop of mustard right there, like he had just eaten a dog walking through Central Park. And I'm like, oh, what am I gonna do with this guy? And he has like this kind of funny walk, So he walks in, I almost turn around, and he goes, are you Dan? I said, I am. I put my hand out, and he slaps it away. He goes, we're gonna hug. And I realized very quickly that Earl is incredibly happy. And if he was not singing, I don't know what else he would do with his life, because I don't think he could operate a cash register, right? And he gives me a huge hug. Now I have a fresh dollop of mustard on my lapel. I'm like, oh, this is it. So what do we do, he says. I said, I don't know, man. I don't really know what to do with you, which I didn't say out loud, but I thought, okay, well, we're going to do for you what we do for everyone else. We're going to get you an audition. Earl's like, great. I just love the fact that I get to live this wonderful life. Like, he's an incredibly happy guy. So we get him an audition. He goes in, sings it, walks out. I'm like, I think that went pretty well, but it was for a nowhere opera company, middle of nowhere. No one's ever heard of it. I'd never heard of it. Next thing I know, I get a phone call the next day. We'd like to hire Earl Patriarcho. I was like, wow, he got his first gig. That's amazing. So I went into Caroline's office and I was like, guess who just got hired? And she looked at me like, it's beginner's luck, and you will fail soon. So we put Earl up for another audition. And he says to me, he's like, if we do this, I need to make sure I can bring my family. I need to be able, I was like, Earl, whatever makes you happy, man. Like, we can craft it around that. Next audition, goes in, gets the job. Third audition, goes in, gets the job. Fourth audition, goes in, gets the job. We limit it to only places he can bring his family and really do things that keep him happy. 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14 in a row, which she had never seen, Caroline had never seen, and we had not seen since. Right? He hits everything. And I'm not talking about nowhere now. Now I'm talking about Paris and Madrid and London. Like, he's getting huge gigs. And finally one day, I get this fax. Again, I don't have to explain faxes to you, fortunately. But it was like on thermal paper, and I could hear it from my office. You hear like, zzz, 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 right? And then I hear the thermal paper go, sort of just land softly on the ground and go around. Metropolitan Opera. We would like to invite Earl Patriarcho to audition on the main stage of the Met. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing, right? And I call Earl. I'm like, dude, you're going to audition at the Metropolitan Opera. And Earl, being Earl, goes, is that good? I'm like, yes, Earl, that's very good, right? So he's like, great, wonderful, let's do this. I can bring my family. It's always about the family, always about the happiness. So he comes to New York, and what happens at the Met is that you walk on the stage, you walk into the stage, into the side of the stage, and they usher the singer onto the stage, and the agent, they shove down what I call the Being John Malkovich lane, because the door's about that big, and I know it's built for you to bang your head on. And so you duck underneath, and you go down, you go into this huge hall, right? Almost 4,000 seats in there. And there's Earl walking across the stage, doing his Earl shuffle, looking super awkward. And behind him is that night's set, which is all of Paris, because it's La Boheme, right? So he shuffles onto stage, doing the Earl thing, and I'm like, this is not good, this is not gonna work. I'm getting really nervous. And I look up, and usually there are 3 people sitting in the shadows: casting director, casting assistant, general director. This time there are 4, and I realized the 4th one, because he has the biggest head of hair I've ever seen, is James Levine, the music director of the Metropolitan Opera and the most powerful man in music. And I'm like, what's he doing here? He never comes to auditions. This is crazy. Now I'm getting super nervous. And Earl's up there. You can see he's kind of nervous, doing his thing, doing his shuffle back and forth. They say, thank you so much for coming. What would you like to sing? He says, I'd like to sing the aria from The Barber of Seville, which we all know because we either love opera or we've watched Bugs Bunny. And he gets up there and says, thank you very much. And he sings it. Thank you so much. What else have you brought? And he lists off 4 songs, all in different languages, because that's what happens. They choose the Mozart, because the Mozart's really tough for the voice. He sings it. I think it goes quite well. And usually what happens next is they say, thank you so much for coming, we'll let you know. But this time they don't say anything. Silence, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. I'm getting nervous. Earl starts doing the shuffle. Earl starts doing like the crazy shuffle, right? Next thing I know, a minute and a half, nothing, 2 minutes, nothing. Next thing I know, that head of hair of James Levine is bouncing down the aisle up to Earl. And they have this interaction. I'm thinking, I've never seen this. What's going on? Clearly Earl thanks him, does the Earl shuffle off the stage. I run through that Being John Malkovich door, totally forget it's there, bang my head into it. And I finally get out, I'm like, Earl, man, what happened out there? And Earl, being Earl, goes, oh yeah, so the set for La Boheme is out there. And I was like, yes, Earl, I know. I was actually out there too. What happened though? Oh, so they asked me what I wanted to sing. Earl, I know, man, I was out there. What happened with the conversation with Levine? He goes, oh, that. Like he was surprised that he'd forgotten about it, even though it happened 30 seconds ago. I said, yeah, man, what happened with that? And he said, oh, yeah. He walked up and he said, Earl, that was a very good audition. I hate to tell you this, though. I don't think you're a baritone, which is the voice type that Earl had sung his entire, seemingly, since puberty life. I think you're a tenor. Now, if that doesn't resound to you, think about it this way. I don't think that you're a quarterback. I think you're a safety. Maybe I don't think you're a cricket player, I think you're a hockey player. But the point is that it's a really, really tough transition. And my thought is, oh, well, you're never going to sing at the Met, which is okay, because you're still a happy guy, and, that's all right. You have lots of other things going on. It's your family and your gigs. And I said, okay, what'd you say to him? He said, well, I reflected for a second. He said, Maestro, I may be a baritone here, I may be a tenor here, but I'm a baritone here. And I'm a baritone here. I thought, that's brave, man. I didn't say that to him, but I said, good for you, man. Good for you. You know who you are. You're living the life that makes you happy, singing the stuff that makes you happy, that you have this family that makes you happy. And we walked back really nicely, even though I knew he'd never sing at the Met. His life was happy. It was a good life. He was enjoying things. And he was achieving at a very high level as a result. Well, the next day, I was sitting at my desk. I hear the fax machine go again. Zzz, 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 zzz. I go around. I pick up the fax. Metropolitan Opera. we would like to invite Earl Patriarcho to sing the title role of the Barber of Seville next year at the Met on the main stage. Earl's sung in the Metropolitan Opera now for the last 20 years in a row, always as a baritone, never as a tenor. He has always put his family in front of everything else that's happened. He has always put his spirituality, his faith, before anything else that's happened. He's always made sure that he is a happy guy. And this was evidenced by the fact that about 10 years ago, he walked into the general manager's office and said, I want to thank you for everything you've done. You have helped make my career something really special. I don't want to do the big roles anymore. I don't want to be away from my family. Would you let me just sing in the chorus? Which they agreed to. He's happier than he's ever been, still performing at an incredibly high level, and has made the transition beautifully. Now, I did not tell Earl I was telling this story until about 2 years ago, even though I've been telling it for about 5. So I took him to a restaurant to tell him, a really crowded restaurant, by the way, on purpose. And we sat there, and at the end of the meal, I said, I have to tell you something. And I told him this story, word for word, as I told it to you. And at the end, I didn't know what was going to happen, but Earl, being Earl, stood up, knocking over most of the drinks at our table and the table next to us, moved both tables aside, spilling the rest of the drinks he hadn't already knocked over. And I'm sitting there like, what is going to happen now? And he just opened up his arms, and he started to cry. And I started to cry. And he gave me this huge hug, and he said, look, Dan, if telling this story means that you can help other people understand that happiness precedes great performance, that we can have lives of excellence and success, if we begin with happiness, you can tell it all you want. And now that I have, to you. Now, when success and happiness coexist, that was the question we started out with. Well, they can go one way, or they can go the other. Whether you're talking about kids, you're talking about Olympians, whether you're talking about Earl making decisions the way he has, or you're talking about people in any realm. We have an advantage when we begin with happiness. It is something that we can choose to leverage in our work. And I wish you the very best in all you do in helping your players do exactly that. So thanks very much for having me.